Ask yourself if you can deal with a second term of teleprompter dependency. Remind yourself of Van Jones and a list of other appointees as long as your arm. Recall that President Obama and his administration attacked the D.C. voucher program that allowed impoverished children to escape the D.C. public schools. Remind yourself that he inserted himself unsuccessfully into the campaign to bring the Olympics to Chicago. Keep in mind his extraordinary rhetoric, implying on one occasion that the collapse of the Minnesota Bridge over the Mississippi River was the result of a lack of infrastructure funding. Recall that he said he believed in American exceptionalism, but then President Obama added, but all countries believe that they're exceptional. As you consider re-electing President Obama, keep in mind his dabbling in basketball bracketology while the Middle East fell into chaos and gas prices skyrocketed. Keep in mind his attacks on Scott Walker and the Wisconsin legislature for the governor and the legislature's exercise of their sovereign legislative authority on public employee issues. Keep in mind his Department of Justice's attack on Arizona for that state's exercise of its sovereign legislative authority on the issue of citizen identification rules. As you think about President Obama in a second term, think that we might have another beer summit following another completely improvident and unsubstantiated attack on another police department like Cambridge. Consider President Obama's administration's cancellation of the virtual border fence project without a replacement or indeed any concern for border security whatsoever. Keep in mind President Obama seized control of the student loan program. Keep in mind, Janet, the system worked, Napolitano. As you consider returning President Obama for a second term, do not forget to remember his attempt to try terrorists in New York City, the one unsuccessful prosecution of one massive terrorist attack that ought to have led to the death penalty. Keep in mind his many and frequent attempts to close Guantanamo Bay. It's still open, but no thanks to President Obama. If you care about farming, consider the fact that the Obama administration continues to deny full water deliveries to California's Central Valley because of the Delta smelt. Think about all those FCC commissioners who are pursuing net neutrality without congressional authorization and in the service of a hard left agenda that will seize control of the internet. Think about the recess appointment of hard leftist Craig Beck to the National Labor Relations Board over the objections of the United States Senate. Or think about foreign policy, the complete incoherence on the question of Egypt, sending Ambassador Frank Wisner there and then throwing Frank Wisner under the bus, being for Mubarak before he was against Mubarak. His inability to recognize the rise of the Muslim Brotherhood there. Think of the president's indecision and dithering on the Afghanistan surge, coupled with the announcement of eventual withdrawal. Think about the fact that trade agreements, free trade agreements with Colombia, Panama, and South Korea have languished on his watch. Think about the fact that he tried to return to power the would-be dictator of Honduras after that nation's Supreme Court rightfully removed that dictator from office. Think about President Obama withdrawing the missile defense shield from Poland and the Czech Republic without telling the Czech Republic and Poland that he was going to do so. Keep in mind that he sent the bust of Churchill back to Great Britain. Keep in mind that the president bowed to the Saudi king and the Japanese emperor. Keep in mind the president's hyper-partisan approach to governing, including his famous "I won, you lost" in the White House in 2009, and the stylish assault on Paul Ryan when Congressman Ryan was an invited guest to the president's April 2001 deficit speech. A nice turn, that. Whatever you do, don't forget that the president loves demonizing rhetoric towards his opponents, like accusing doctors of grabbing people for unnecessary tonsillectomies. Keep in mind the President and Eric Holder's politicization of the Department of Justice, including the Black Panther case, and their refusal to defend the Defense of Marriage Act. And whatever you do, don't forget, President Obama attacked the United States Supreme Court as it sat silently in front of him during his State of the Union address. Whatever you do, don't forget the president's use of unaccountable czars and his refusal to accept congressional direction vis-a-vis those czars contained in the 2001 continuing resolution. Don't forget the president's attempt to unconstitutionally impose the Disclose Act. He sponsored the Disclose Act, and Congress turned him down, so he made it happen with a wave of the pen. Don't forget his big push for cap and tax in Congress. But when the Congress refused to pass cap and trade, the president told the Environmental Protection Agency to impose it anyway. Don't forget that the EPA has also shut down Shell Oil's Arctic oil exploration. Don't forget the incompetent, truly monumentally incompetent handling of the Gulf oil disaster. And don't forget that in the aftermath of that incompetence, the president imposed a slow permatorium that has led to rig after rig leaving Louisiana's Gulf Coast. Widespread unemployment there, skyrocketing gas prices. Don't forget the Libyan fiasco, though chances are it will go on and on and on. And whatever you do as you consider whether or not President Obama deserves a second term, don't forget his failure to support the Syrian revolution when Assad, the dictator, mowed down his people by the dozens, by the scores, by the hundreds. And while we're thinking about failure to act, don't forget that the president failed to do anything to support Iran's Green Revolution in the aftermath of the 2009 elections there. When you couple his hostility towards the free democracy movement in Iran with the president's hostility to Israel, his attack on apartment expansion, his icing of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in the basement of the White House, well, you've got all you need to remember about the president's foreign policy. Don't forget Dodd-Frank, the worst thing to happen to American banking ever. And whatever you do, don't forget that the president ordered the seizure of GM and Chrysler, looting the bondholder wealth and transferring it to his union friends, and then instructing the Department of Treasury to dump that GM stock at a loss. Don't forget the towering Mount Everest high deficits, which accumulate year after year after year. And don't forget that when President Obama promised that he would act, he sent up a 2012 budget that was feckless beyond, well, any reasonable estimate of any kind of irresponsibility. You won't be able to forget gas prices. Not a chance of that. They go up and up and up and up. And the president does nothing except promise aid to Brazil. And whatever you do, keep an eye on that unemployment number. Oh, it never got past 10%. But who knows? With a second term, that could happen. And whatever you do, don't forget the $850 billion wasted in stimulus. Where did it go? And finally, last but certainly not least, don't forget Obamacare. Obamacare that was shoved down, jammed down your throats. Obamacare which is destroying the medical delivery system in the United States. Obamacare which is raising premium, cutting services. Obamacare which screwed the elderly. Obamacare which threatens single-payer government bureaucracy as far as the eye can see. Obamacare that threatens your very life. Don't forget any of this, America, as you consider President Obama is asking for your support for a second term. And all you need to do is times everything I said times 2. And that would be Obama 2.0. Whatever you do, don't forget.